Morning, good afternoon, welcome, and kia ora to those in New Zealand. I'll just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I work, which are the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I extend my respects to their elders. And I'd really like to extend that appreciation to the traditional owners of your land, as well as any local customs that you participate in your country, because of course we are across Asia. If you don't know me, my name is Rosie and I work at Herman in the fairly newly titled role Director of Learning, which is kind of cool. It's all things to do with learning and really supporting you guys to continue to develop and learn in how you can work with, use and apply whole brain thinking in your world. I am a psychologist, don't hold that against me, but my previous background was in education, working with kids, which is where I was this morning in my very good role as a mother, attending presentation day assembly. So some of you might also be going through the end of school wrap up if you have children in that category. And so that's what's happening in the world of Rosie at the moment. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me just 2 seconds. Okay, just give me a camera thumbs up if you can now see that screen there. Oh, lovely. So we ran this forum last year, The Gift of Giving, with 3 different practitioners who kindly shared some activities and exercises. If you weren't there, I suggest getting in touch and we can send the link. And it was very well received. It is always lovely to hear how other practitioners are working with, using and applying whole brain thinking in the real world. And so I kindly, I reached out to 3 practitioners. One is unwell, but it's all right. We can work with that. And they have kindly shared or agreed to share with us some of the ways they have been using and applying whole brain thinking. So I'm very appreciative to the 3 people who are sharing today. Let me, of course, begin with our whole brain welcome. So the 3 people who we have presenting are Ben Witherford from New Zealand, Sarah Austin, who is in Victoria, Melbourne, I believe, could be travelling, and Suzanne Sanderford, who is in WA at the moment. So nice and early there for her, as well as anyone in Asia. We appreciate you coming. Oh, and Sarah Wood in the UK, where it's midnight there. Why are we doing this session? Well, as I just shared, the vast experience of this network is amazing. And I'll just pause here. If you have something you want to share, please get in touch with me. My email will pop up at the very last slide. I love to hear what you're doing, activities, exercises, implementation stories. Very, very interested to hear those and share them with the network. Because you guys often know more than me, because I get to deal with the practitioners, but you're often dealing with the thinkers. And so you've got some excellent examples. So we have 3 practitioners, each sharing an exercise or activity or story about how they've used or worked with whole brain thinking, the HBDI. And each person will have around 15 minutes to present. That reminds me, I better get my phone ready for just managing time. I will do that. And if you've got questions as they're presenting, please pop them in the chat. At the end, if we have time from each presentation, I will facilitate that Q&A with the practitioner. So if you do have questions, pop them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll do a breakout, but I reserve the right to remove that, because see how exciting these stories are and how much time they take. But we do possibly have a buffer. So let's get started. And I'd like to welcome Ben Witherford. He's up here from New Zealand. I will not introduce him too much because he has a wonderful introduction, but I'd love to hand over to Ben to introduce yourself and tell us about what you do.
Thanks, Rosie. Kia ora koutou, welcome. I'm coming to you from Queenstown, New Zealand. That photo you're looking at there in the background is from one of the jetties looking across to the Hilton in Lake Wakatipu. And you can just see the Remarkables mountain range in the background there. That was taken by my son, just a little father moment there for you. My day job is principal of Shotover Primary School, and I'll talk to you a bit about that shortly. And I have a little side hustle where I do a bit of consultancy stuff around using the whole brain framework and a few other things. And I do that under the heading of Think Different, mainly in the education space, because I've been in the principal game now for about 18, 19 years, in education for about 26 in total, all around in New Zealand only. But, yep. Do you want to flick onto the next slide for me, Rosie? This is Shotover Primary School in Queenstown. We opened in 2015, so we're just on the 10-year mark now. And we had 88 children on that first day, and we've got 620 today, and we're supposed to head up to around 850, 900 in the Queenstown area. So all that housing you see, that was a farm back in 2015. The school was a greenfields development, and we've also been built with collaborative teaching spaces. So each teaching space would be the equivalent in floor area of about 4 regular classrooms, if you like we had when we were at school. So our teachers teach in teams of 3 or 4, depending on the age of the children. And that means we've had to learn how to team and how to work together. And I'll get a bit about how we've done that in the past. But I first got exposed to whole brain thinking with Dr. Julie Aiken back in the early 2000s, well, late 90s actually, originally. And made a decision when I took up this role to every staff member, after they're appointed, completes their profile. And it's been a massive game changer in terms of just creating a bit of a shared language with the staff about thinking and how they approach the same thing from different perspectives. It's also actually massively assisted in learning design. So teachers traditionally, if you like, in their own classroom space, they are the king or queen of their domain. Once they're in their classroom, that's their space, and they've got their class of kids and they can sort of do what they want. When they come to work with the colleagues, and there's teams of 2 or 3 of them, they need to be able to understand where each other's coming from, and the human model has given them a really good framework. So it's really well embedded now, 10 years later, into the life of the school. It's also embedded into our learning design. So the New Zealand curriculum has, for example, key competencies, and we've framed that around, because you can localize that work in New Zealand. So we've framed that around the human brain model. So we call them the Shotover capacities. So yeah, it's been a massive game changer. But today I want to talk to you about leadership and pipeline leadership theory. Rosie, can you click on to the next? So some of you will be familiar with this theory of leadership, this pipeline model, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but when I first came across it in about 2006, 2007, it gave me a lovely conceptual understanding about how different leadership roles fit within the wider organisation. And so this, what you can see on the screen in front of you, is my take on that in a school context. So pipeline 1 being the mentor or the classroom teacher, pipeline 2 being a middle leader, a team leader, pipeline 3 being the associate principal or deputy principal, pipeline 4 being my role as the principal, and then in New Zealand we have a board of trustees, or you might put the Department of Ministry Education in that context, depending on the system in which you're operating. But it's interesting to help you get a sort of an understanding of how leadership might work within that wider organisational culture. And what that did for me is provide a lot of clarity as to the roles we play. And in schools, quite often leaders can get trapped in operating outside their pipeline. And when that occurs, then the organisation tends to become a bit inefficient and ineffective. So we used this model quite early on to try and get people to understand their role they play, but it didn't create the level of role clarity that we were after. So what we did is work on really defining that, and we did this about 3 years ago. We decided we would try and use the pipeline leadership model and the HBDI framework to work on creating some role clarity, and we decided to do this for Pipeline 3 first. We did this on the back of some reading I'd done and also some research I'd read around, I think most of it was put out by Gallup, where they talk about the impact that middle leadership plays on the success of an organisation. So Pipeline 3 are quite critical. So if you've got a school of 600 children, that's about 50 staff, made up of teaching staff and non-teaching staff. And there's a real risk that the organisation becomes quite siloed and not connected. And for that to not happen, Pipeline 3 needs to be highly effective in what they do. So if you put the next slide up there, the next transition there, we decided we needed to determine what are the vital leadership actions. And this is the critical part. I mean, a quick search on Google or in Amazon will give you about 70,000 titles you could buy on leadership. And even if you wanted to pick a very, very small percentage of those and build your leadership capacity, you're not going to be able to do everything that everybody talks about that a great leader should do in a particular role. So the question we asked ourselves was, in Pipeline 3, what are the vital leadership actions? And I gave the team, when we worked on this, I gave them some criteria. So there had to be 8. There could only be 8 vital leadership actions, and there has to be 2 per quadrant. And I did this because it would sort of force us to be quite holistic in our thinking about what are the vital leadership actions. And it would also account for our sort of natural thinking preferences. So some of you have probably worked with clients where they might have had a staff member say, well, I can't do that part of my role because it's not my natural thinking preference. So I'm not a naturally blue thinker. Therefore, any analysis required in my role, it's not really me. Can that be handed off to someone else? But that's not practicable, and it's also not effective in the organisation. So what we did here is if you're in a Pipeline 3 role, you've got to engage in the role in its entirety. And so there is blue thinking required in Pipeline 3, and there's green thinking required in Pipeline 3, and there's red thinking required in Pipeline 3, and there's yellow thinking required in Pipeline 3. And so over several sessions, we designed these vital leadership actions, and these have become the basis of what a Pipeline 3 leader needs to do, should do, is asked to do, is committed to doing within our organisation. And it means that they can't contract themselves out of that because they may not have a preference or their preference is lower in one of the quadrants. Because they have written them, I didn't write them and give them to them. We did this collaboratively. They've made a commitment to basically executing on these vital leadership actions. So if they do nothing else in the course of their day, their week, their month, their year, they've got to do these 8 vital leadership actions. And we believe if they do that well, then they're likely to be performing at a very high level collectively and individually. So just flick on to the next slide for me. So this is sort of a process we work through. So that writing those vital leadership actions create a high level of role clarity. So if you're employed at Shotover Primary School in a Pipeline 3 role, and we've also done it for Pipeline 2 as well, then it's really, really clear about what's expected of you in your role. And I can say that with a high degree of certainty, because in the 10 years we've been operating, these have only been operating for about 3 years. So in hindsight, the previous 5 to 7 years, there wasn't the level of clarity we've got now. And it doesn't mean that those leaders weren't performing, and doesn't mean they weren't doing a great job, but it wasn't as honed as it is now. Then what we've done to actually make these work on the ground is they basically assess themselves against each 1 out of 10, and they write some notes about how well they're going. And then every term I meet with them one-on-one in what I call a leadership state of play session, and they bring their assessment with them. And we work on which ones are going well, which ones are struggling with, which ones are challenging them, which ones are they're nailing. And from that, we collectively write one goal, just one single goal, and emphasis on that, because I've found while there could be 2 or 3 or 4 goals, the more there is, the less likely they are to be achieved. So we focus on one goal. So if Rosie just flicks up the next transition, I'll show you what that form looks like. So it's quite simple. It's not over-engineered, I don't think. So they rate themselves out of 10 for each vital leadership action. And I want to get a sense of from them about what is going well for each of those actions, what's frustrating them, what comes easily to them, and what do they give more energy to. So remembering they can't contract themselves out of any of those if it doesn't really align with their own profile, their own thinking preference profile. But obviously, it would stand to reason that if they've got a strong preference in green, for example, they're likely to be performing pretty easily. It's likely to take less energy for them to think long term and to run a great meeting. Equally, if their red is not as strong, they're likely to find it quite hard to connect the silos and how to know their people. And so then it becomes quite a nuanced conversation for me to support them in the coaching sense about how they might connect the silos, how they might do that without requiring as much energy as they had been. Because you can start focusing in on that because we've only got 8 actions, eight leadership actions we're focusing on. So it's been a massive game changer in that sense. Do you want to flick over to the next one for me, please, Rosie? So sort of in terms of the outcomes, what I've noticed is it really hones the development of the leader in the pipeline individually and collectively. So because we're talking about pipeline 3 and pipeline 2, we're talking about the middle layer of leadership within the organisation, and they are critical glue that hold the place together. They're the connection between my pipeline and pipeline 1. And so collectively, they've got to be going well. And because they've got a lot of role clarity now about exactly what they need to be doing in a leadership sense, their development has skyrocketed, to be honest, collectively and individually. It means that as we've mapped the rollout and we've mapped when I have individual development sessions with them and looked at where their own individual pathway is, it's given more clarity to that. So rather than grasping for potential next steps in their own leadership development, this has actually enabled us to easily identify what they might be. And it's been quite fascinating and quite insightful as we've mapped the vital leadership actions with their own profile to see where the strengths are and where the development might be required. The other thing that's come out of it is they've taken a massive ownership of their role, because they've got the role clarity thing. I know I've probably laboured a bit, but it can't be underestimated when people have a high sense of what's expected of them in their role. They tend to own it to a higher degree. And that's become quite obvious in the last 2 years. So as a result of that, their energy, if you like, well, what I've called energy, what I'm meaning by that is their level of commitment, their level of wanting to develop themselves as leaders, and their level of connecting across the organisation has gone up another level, because they're really clear in their own minds individually and also collectively about what they're trying to get done, which is a game changer from my point of view, trying to maintain our direction of travel and our vision and so forth, and what we're trying to achieve on a strategic level. So that process, if I was reflecting on this in terms of how we came to this point, and I've done a little bit of this work with a couple of clients, not through the finished product yet, but we've done some foundation work. What I would keep doing again is introduce the pipeline model theory of leadership and make that, get them have a conceptual understanding of that first. The second thing is that the vital leadership actions need to be written collectively. They can't be written by the people that aren't being expected to commit to them. They would be 2 deal breakers, I think, if you didn't go through those 2 phases of the development of vital leadership actions, then they're not likely to be as effective. And I've seen that where with one client I was working with, and with the best intentions, but went away and after the first workshop sort of padded out, almost finished them, if you like. And as a result, there was a bit of a flat feel in the second workshop in terms when we got off to it, because the people that were supposed to be contributing to the vital leadership actions felt like the work had been done with not full participation of their ideas. So we had to circle back. So writing them together collaboratively, collectively is critical. Any questions?
Thank you. Pop your questions in the chat. I'm going to go through and get Sarah and then Suzanne to present, and then I'll come back to any of the questions because Ben will also be listening, but he could also potentially respond in the chat to those questions as we go through. But thank you so much for that. I might do a summary at the end, but I took some lovely whole brain notes just then. So it sounds wonderful. And I have heard that story before, which is, and I think it's so powerful. So thank you so much for sharing. Round of applause for Ben. Let's move to, there's his email address. If you're in education, if you think that you could connect with him, thinkdifferentnz@gmail.com. These slides are also going to be shared, so you will be able to access them later. Thank you. Next, we have Sarah Austin, who's going to talk through an activity she's used around the Diagnose Your Organisation, which you may be familiar with. And she's going to talk about how this came to life in the leadership programs that she runs. I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Rosie, and thanks, Ben. I really enjoyed that story and the lovely pictures and hearing about education. It's really inspirational. So thank you. My approach today is really a very, very simple, practical tool that I've used with mostly within leadership programs. But firstly, a bit about me, 2211 thinker. I actually just realised I did my profile in 2017 was the last time I did it. And so my profile has possibly changed slightly, but my strongest focus is on intuition, synthesizing, integrating, being holistic and teaching. So I really love bringing both concepts and different concepts and disciplines together. So I guess that's the example that I'm bringing today, which is about bringing the HBDI concept, joining it with some other leadership concepts to create more depth in understanding how leadership operates in a broader organisational context. So I've been in OD or HR for 30 years, mostly within organisations, but probably the last 6 years in consulting. I have two fantastic partners. One of them's online today, Sarah Wood, who's in the UK, and I believe it's midnight there. So thanks, Sarah. That's great teamwork. Thanks for being here. So we work in partnership in a fairly small business, but really enjoying and loving the work that we do. So my focus is really on supporting, I guess, leaders to be more empathetic and compassionate in their leadership. And I believe if they're more compassionate about themselves, they're more compassionate with their teams. So I essentially do this so teams don't suck and organisations don't suck and work doesn't suck. That we're actually creating more humanistic organisations. So I've been working with the Herman tool since 2013. I absolutely love it. It's my favourite and probably the one I use the most. And we do fairly much incorporate into all our business processes as well as our leadership programs. So that's probably enough about me. I'm really fascinated in neuroscience, nature and Pilates. They're my sort of personal pet passions, and I have a bedside table full of neuroscience books that are partly read, fully read and reread. Okay, if we move on. So the context of using this is essentially within broader, bigger leadership development programs. So if we haven't actually done the HBDI, which is usually fundamental to our leadership programs, but if we don't get the opportunity to use it, I still use whole brain thinking as a way of people sort of really investigating their leadership approach and also what's kind of going on within the broader context of the organisation. So if we don't do HBDI profiles to start with, we might do, say, think a bingo or something to familiarise the group with whole brain thinking and give an overview of what it means and introduce sort of whole brain leadership as well. And this is really sort of a framing exercise at the start of a leadership workshop. I ran it recently with a automotive engineering company, and fairly much aligned, I guess, in a way with the individual leadership approaches, but what you might have expected from that type of business. Maybe if we skip to the next one, Rosie. So we do this to raise self-awareness around, you know, my operating style within the broader context of the organisation. And also to draw attention to the fact that my perception of how the organisation operates might be different to others. And in most of our leadership programs, we don't just focus on individual capability development, we focus on the capability development of the team, of them operating as a leadership team. So this particular tool helps to sort of situate them as a collective within the organisation, the influence that they may have, and you know what the blind spots obviously and the strengths might be. If we go on to the next one, Rosie, so you'll see what we do is we create the Diagnose Your Organisation tool, which is available usually as a handout, but we turn it into a poster, and we get the team to identify through a dotocracy type process. So green dots in this case of the example that you can see there are the 4 things that the organisation pays most attention to, and the blue dots are the things the organisation pays least attention to. And so it really gives a very quick perceptual understanding of how people perceive the organisation, both partly culturally, but also sort of operationally. And so we look at this and say, oh, what does this actually mean? What does this mean for where you sit around your individual thinking preferences, and how does that align here? And how does this actually align with where the organisation is actually going to go? So in this particular example, we were in there to support them develop operational plans. So a new strategic plan had been developed and they were needing to operationalise them at the department level. And so it was really them thinking about, okay, well, we have quite a new, different and more innovative strategy to achieve. How does that map with how we are currently working and operating? Are we, are we innovative? Are we creative? Do we engage and collaborate with people to come up with creative approaches to things? How are we doing business at the moment, and how does that map to what we're required to do to stretch into the future? So it was really, really insightful for this recent group that I worked with, because they could see that whilst they kind of thought they were dabbling in this space, their real focus was really on what you might expect in an engineering firm, which is policy, process, safety, metrics and technical competence, I guess. And they hadn't really engaged in the sort of yellow quadrant as much. And also they hadn't gathered ideas throughout the business and filtered them up, because it typically had been a sort of top-down type business that was globally owned, Japanese organisation. And they felt there was some constraints around how innovative they could actually be. So it really created an open space for discussing what's the current state, where do we need to get to, what's the organisation, what are the organisational levers that we have, and how does my leadership actually fit into that. And then we related, of course, to whole brain leadership, which aspects of leadership need to be enhanced and where do we need to grow as a leadership collective, and where are our blind spots and which ones can we perhaps, perhaps dial back our competence in some areas in order to really to grow and enhance our capabilities. And in this case, it was more the sort of what we call non-rational part of leadership, which is the less tangible, the less measurable, and arguably the harder sort of to develop work. And then on to the next slide, Rosie. I think I've already covered most of this, but what this did was sort of place the individual leadership approaches within the organisational context, highlighted those blind spots around organisational leadership, not just my individual leadership. It opened up discussion about how they can work to collectively build capability. And it was really powerful, I guess, in that some people often see, oh, you see the organisation this way, but I see it this way. And it really opens up conversations that they've never really had before. People tend to make assumptions around a lot of these things rather than, delving deep into why the organisation works this way and what assumptions we make about it. And of course, being a sort of stand-up exercise, everyone gets involved and engaged, decides where their sticky dots are going, creates a fair bit of energy around, where are people going to put their dots, and oh wow, isn't that interesting and different to what my perception is. And then I've used this with all levels of leadership, so from executives, middle managers, and recently appointed leaders as well. So it's really had some very practical and really useful reflection points. And we come back to this throughout the program as well and come back and say, okay, where are we at now? Do you think we might be able to shift the way in which we're operating as a leadership team in order to achieve where we need to go? So I think that's fairly much it, Rosie, in terms of my slides, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, thank you. It is. It's wonderful. And that would be Sarah's email if you want to get in touch with her. As I said, these slides will be shared. There are a couple of questions, Sarah, that came in via the chat. So maybe when Suzanne's presenting, you might want to answer them. Like ones like, what neuroscience books are you recommending? And some things like that. But again, thank you. It's it is an exercise in our practitioner portal. She's mentioned a couple, Bingo and the Diagnose Your Organisation. I've just taken notes to actually link to the resources in the with the email. So I'll link those resources in the follow-up email as well if you're not familiar with them. There's some really powerful application. Oh, okay. No, I won't, because my colleagues, my wonderful colleagues, have just done that for me. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't scroll down. My lovely colleagues have actually linked directly to the exercises there for you that you can access and use. But thank you for sharing. And I think many of you, well, at least in my experience in talking to many of you, that engineering client, or the client that is more perhaps in the blue-green style of thinking, is often a client that many of you are working with. And so I think it's great to see how you're bringing that to life in that context. I'm going to jump over to Suzanne now, and then, as I said, I can do a wrap up of everyone at the end, because I don't want to take up too much time of me talking. I want to hear our lovely facilitators speaking. So I'd love to introduce Suzanne Sandiford, who's going to share an example, or a story, an example of improving collaboration through self-awareness and diverse thinking. And I will let her take the reins.
Cool, thanks, Rosie. Also an engineering example. So yeah, always fascinating working with a mass of left brain thinkers, because as soon as they ask you a technical question, you go, oh, I've got to get this right. Especially when one of them started to challenge some of the theories around the triune brain. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put it on the car park and we can all do our own research, because right now is not the time. So about me, 3211, that's my profile. Andrea, you may or may not remember this story. When the materials got refreshed, I think 2017, 2018, and we all got our new profiles. That's when I discovered my blue was actually 3, not 2, because the team told us what the definitions actually meant, which is kind of a low blue story all by itself, because up until that point I hadn't read the definitions. So when I did that, yeah, it gave me a new profile with absolutely no blue descriptors whatsoever. And under pressure, it goes to 0. So you were talking about budget earlier, Rosie. Yeah. Under pressure, Christmas, what budget? My rest of my profile, high yellow, high red, medium on the green. Green mostly learnt, I guess, through the roles that I do, but I do actually quite like organizing stuff for other people. Started life as an admin manager, which kind of says it all. But I think the biggest thing for me, what I enjoy the most and what I love the most is anything creative, ideation, brainstorming. Not always the one that comes up with the ideas, but I'm the one that can build on them, add to, and synthesize. My absolutely favorite thing to do is bring together all the pieces. High red, high on empath, big people person, and down at the bottom, the little image is where we get our energy. So all of this is stuff that we use with this client. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. But largely get my energy from other people. So when I'm online, and this is my challenge, which again Rosie's recently challenged me on to lean into, is how do I get more energy from other people through the screen? So I'm trying some stuff on that. I run my own business for just over a year, SJS Consulting. My own motto, not my one for my clients, is I love working for myself, but I don't like working by myself. So I tend to partner with other agencies and organizations that are already operating in the field of organizational leadership development and be a partner or associate as part of that. So I'm originally from the UK. I worked in New Zealand for 7 years, lived there. That's where I did my HBDI. Actually, it was whilst I was living in New Zealand that I did it, but I actually did my training in Perth with Andrew in Australia, and then returned back, lived in New Zealand, and I've been in Perth for nearly 3 years. So still fresh off the boat, as we Poms say. All right, move on then. Thanks, Rosie. So our context. In essence, I was approached by one of the organizations I work with to help a engineering team improve collaboration KPI. Now, I have to say this came from a bit of a driver of it's a score in your engagement survey. It's been selected by the boss. Work on it. So not necessarily a inner drive to make it better, more of a top down, it's a KPI, you must improve it. But we were up for the challenge anyway. So the client engineering team, or engineering department, I should say, 8 teams within that department. So 8 or 9 leaders altogether, including the leader, 76 all up across 2 locations, one in the city, one at the airport. And then with a mobile team, shall we say, who go out and work on site for the business and come back. So their customers are multiple sites across WA, in fact, across Australia, not just WA, including some shift workers within one of the teams. So they very rarely saw each other. So lots of kind of things to juggle. The delivery partner is the first time we'd worked together. So our first project, pretty significant for them as they're pretty new to Perth and trying to make a name for themselves. Working across time zones, they're in South Africa, I'm in Perth. They have a very strong agency brand, and you'll see a little bit of that. That's where the images you see. And I have a very strong personality, so that came up sometimes, you know, when we were kind of working through, but I was the one at the front man, the front woman. And so we had to jostle through some things to make it work, which was a whole brain exercise in itself. So I did introduce them to and take them through from a basic level before we started, but they haven't done their profiles, which is a hindsight reflection of mine. So move on, Rosie, to the challenge. So what we proposed is, in essence, if we can, and again, you're familiar with all of this language, understand more about ourselves and preferences, understand more about our stakeholders and their preferences, and then consider the impact of our current approach and how that's having an impact on the three things: communicating, decision making, and problem solving. Then we can adapt our style, adopt a whole brain approach, use some new tools, which we created in a toolkit, adapt or update our ways of working. So we thought about process as well, not just self. And then in essence, be more conducive to collaboration. So that was the pitch to them, was actually, let's take this from a holistic perspective and let's think about how we can help you learn more about yourselves and the way you do work, so that you can then consider, and always with the choice of, you adapt or adopt what suits, with a little push into that, outside of that comfort zone piece. So they were happy with that. So then the next one gives you a bit of an idea of what we did. So we started with an insight. So we already had the engagement survey, but we started with an insight survey, which specifically dove into, tell us about what happens right now around collaboration, decision making, problem solving within your team and with your clients. So it was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 questions, got them to kind of rate how often these things happen, which then gave us further insights of the focus area. And whilst it wasn't, highly how's the best way to put it? What the story told us was that there was more of a priority to increase collaboration with the customer, that there was a sense of, we do okay here as a department or as a team. And so we followed that as a bit of a thread. And what we came to later was actually that they were sitting in a very comfortable place. So very low debate, very low challenge. So what they meant by we do okay was, well, I say something and nobody argues, so it's fine, right? So there was just this kind of nervousness to challenge. So we took the insight survey into the leadership team workshop. The leadership team went full pelt on whole brain thinking. They did their individual profiles, they did the team profile, they did the team effectiveness survey. As per my HBDI profile, I planned all those 3 things to happen in one day. They didn't, of course, that's stupid. And so we basically did a team debrief, and then the team profile, and then the effectiveness kind of sat behind, which worked really well anyway. From that, we had, in essence, 3 focus areas that came out, which were we as a team, and you can see that is their number 3. You can actually see their profiles. Those are their profiles, which you'll obviously be able to see on the PDF. So that's the whole team. You can see all that black happening in the blue and all that black happening in the green, less so in the red and less so in the yellow. And if you look at the leadership team profile down at the bottom corner in box 2, you can see their leadership type profile pretty much mirrors that. And they've got one little outlier on the red, which is the coordinator, which is often the case in these teams. So their 3 areas was, which was fabulous for them. Number 1, as a leadership team, we need to be more focused on being strategic. How do we take a processed approach to being more strategic? How do we make it happen? Number 2, how do we improve team collaboration and communication? And number 3, how do we improve with the operations? So then we went into a full department debrief, which had, in essence, all 70, I think a couple didn't come, but 70 people in a room, all having, I guess, en masse debrief in 90 minutes, so that they understood their profile. So that was the only priority, is to understand the profile. And then they came back together for session 4 in their teams, their smaller teams of 8, where they had basically prepared to share, and I slightly adapted the prepare to share to be, tell us a bit about your profile, highest, lowest, energy, then tell us about your decision making, tell us about what you need to be best, and tell us what you'd like to be better at. So they were in essence the 8 teams sharing all of those. And for them, they discovered so much about each other just in those 90 minutes of sharing. From there, we then had 5 mixed workshops where we basically mixed all the 8 teams up, and we had 2 opportunity statements. And I purposely called them opportunity statements, not problem statements. And they were in essence, how might we, and it's not on there, but they were, how might we better collaborate? But in this, so that we gave them some kind of areas to focus on. So for example, so how might we better collaborate with our customers? And one of the so that we's were so that we can build their capability to do more for themselves. Then we use creative thinking techniques. So the one that I used was the randomizer. Select something random, the glasses case, post-it note, doesn't really matter what it is, and get them to make a direct association between the object and the task to come up with new ideas, which you can probably imagine for looking at the profile of the team was really hard for some people. And again, all the way through, I just kept reiterating, this might be the hardest thing you do today, but lean in, give it a go. And they did. So if you skip to the next in terms of the outcomes, there's a few things in outcomes that I want to share. The first was when I first embarked on this, I actually called Rosie up and I was like, right, Rosie, is there a quick and dirty? Those were my actual words. Is there a quick and dirty, because they don't have the budget to do the profile for all 75, just for the leadership team? And she was like, obviously not. Goodness me. Imagine if Michael could hear this conversation. What are you thinking? So I explained, and then I remembered, we talked about bingo, and I remembered I had this sheet of bingo that we'd played in New Zealand with one of Andrea's face-to-face sessions. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use that. I'm going to get them to do bingo and meet each other. Then when I did the leadership team session, the leadership team loved it so much that they went, can we get a quote for the 65 profiles? And the full team debrief was 1 week later. So in a week, called Rosie, I need 65 tomorrow. And we did. So I upsold 65 profiles, so that thankfully the 90-minute debrief was not just bingo, it was full. Everybody had their profiles. So that was one of the outcomes, that the leadership team just loved it. The second one is grumpy face to happy face, is when I was doing one of the team workshops. I asked, is anyone familiar with profiling? And one guy goes, oh yeah, I am. I've done a few. I said, what have you done? He said, can't remember. They're all nonsense. Okay, thank you for really setting the tone for the meeting. Anyway, when we came back to the brainstorming sessions, he came up to me and he said, I showed my profile to my son. He's really interested. Can I personally sponsor my son to do HBDI? You can have it for free, my friend. Like, well, thank you. Like, that's all I need. So that's the grumpy to happy face. The 3 calls are 3 different calls that I've had since. So one was just one of the leadership saying, can I steal your icebreaker? Because I really enjoyed it. The second was, can you do my son's profile? And the third is that I'm going back to do some leadership team days for the teams so that they can set themselves up for 2025. We go down to what's important for the business. 3 points. Their collaboration, because they've just done the survey again. Their collaboration has gone up by 3 points. 50 is the number of ideas that came out of the ideation session. So from a bunch of left brain thinkers who are analytical and process driven, they came up with 50 juicy ideas of how to be better. And 17 of those got seeded to something that could now become something for them to do next year. So that was a whistle-stop tour of what I did. And I think at that point I should pause to give time for questions.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was wonderful. So if you've got some questions, pop them in. If you do need to jump off, you've got other commitments. We understand. I'll just give them a moment to see if any questions come into for that share. And as you can see, 3 different practitioners, 3 different amazing applications and stories, some of which you may have also been using and applying yourself. There was a nice theme around leadership today. So talking at the leadership level, and also the client base. I'm looking at the type of profiles and the diagnose your organization, you know, the higher focus on the blue and the green. And I love this last slide, actually, the 50 new ideas. Now, if you tell a team, you know, at the beginning, oh, you're going to come up with, you know, 50 new ideas, that's not how it's going to happen. I just think everyone shared a really nice story of the stepping stone to the next step. You all were kind of, and this is what I often talk to practitioners about. And even with Suzanne, she's like, oh, can we do the quick and dirty? And I'm like, yes, if it's a stepping stone. If it's a stepping stone towards what do they need to do next, or what's the opportunity next, and then after that, because the HBDI is a tool that lives on beyond that initial session, and that's where you can get such wonderful value from it. I'm going to wrap up. There was a couple of questions in the chat. Suzanne, you might want to have a little quick look around those. I'm just going to oh, sorry, here's her contact details. If you want to get in touch, reach out, because she said, I like working for myself, but not by myself.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a common theme for many, especially in the consultant network. I really encourage you to connect on LinkedIn, to find who's local, or if not, you know, who you can Zoom with and connect with, because there's such a wonderful wealth of knowledge out there. And you can always get in touch with me and I'll connect you with permission, naturally.
More than happy to collaborate.
Absolutely. That's lovely. So to wrap up today, I'd just like you to reflect on some of the blue quadrant. What has been learned? What has been gained? Your green quadrant question for yourself to think about: how can you make a continued impact? In the red quadrant, who could benefit from any of these ideas? I was literally taking notes in each of the presentations, like, oh, in this group, I could morph that exercise. Like the competencies of Ben's leadership competencies, I often find I need to do that in teams. What are the 8 behaviors of a team? So team behaviors, team values. And I don't probably do it with enough role clarity. If I reflect back on some of it's probably more of a quick and dirty version. And I think we could actually spend a good 90 minutes on that ownership of team behaviors. So who could it benefit? And what else? What else could you do? What's new? What's different? How has this unlocked different ideas? I'm actually going to get back in touch with the 3 of you, because I think there's worthwhile next steps in writing some of this down. I'm happy to do some composing, but actually share this in a written format so that we can really reinforce this wonderful work. So as a final wrap up, if you also as a practitioner have something like this that you're doing in your context, please get in touch with me. You can email me at rosemary@herman.com.au. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If I haven't stalked you already, you can add me. But I think, well, I hope you found value from today's session and got some wonderful new ideas and new exercises out there, because we do often get asked for new ideas and exercises, and I usually say divert to the network, because you guys are doing amazing work out there in bringing this to life. It's truly phenomenal. And when Suzanne shared that story about the skeptic then going, can my son do it? That when she told me that initially, that story, that gave me goosebumps, because you've all had them in your session. The person who's like, yeah, this is a load of rubbish. It's fluffy stuff. And then, you know, for that person to turn around and say, actually, this has been transformational and I want my child to do it. It's just such a testament to the work. So thank you for everybody, and have a wonderful holiday season, Christmas break. I hope you get to relax and rest. And we will not be having a forum in January. We're on holidays in January, but come Feb, we will be kicking back into gear. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.